So it is July 28th, and I want to welcome you to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people with look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, and rebroadcast on the Gwe, CKWE in Tandanega, and on Netroots Radio, Indigenous Resistance Radio, and Real People's Media as well. You can find the audio streaming live at www.ltnradionet.com. And, of course, we are Facebook Live. So if you're hearing this and not watching this, by all means, go to your cell phone, go to your laptop, go to your computer, whatever, and look us up on Facebook. And you can watch the show. I've got Ed Schindler as my guest today. No Matt today. Matt's off doing some family stuff and with his son, and I hope he enjoys himself for the evening. I do have Jake Proud off camera, off mic, who is manning our cameras for our Facebook live stream and for our YouTube channel videos, and I thank him for that work. Our studio engineer is Kelly McMillan, and I thank her for the fine work that she's done with our setup here. The opening song was Buffy St. Marie singing Universal Soldier, and there's a reason that I chose that song, and we're going to talk about that. Look, you can't, unless you live under a rock someplace or live in a cave, you are aware of the foibles of Donald Trump. And, his announcement this week, which seemed to be completely unprovoked, and people can make all their arguments about what it was for. Why make the statement you made about banning transgender enlisted persons? And what does that even mean? What's going to happen with those folks? I mean, those questions are they're questions that aren't answered. And of course, the immediate reaction is, well, that's discriminatory. That seems arbitrary. That seems like a bigoted position. And you know what? You're right. It's all of those things. Transgender folks, the LGBT community, they should have the same rights everybody else does. But you know what? And if you've seen my posts and you know what I've said in the past about enlisting, I got to ask the question, why enlist? I don't mean just why enlist if you're a transgender person. I'm asking the question, why especially now, knowing what you know, knowing who the commander-in-chief is? Why would you enlist? And there's a part of me that says, you know what? If you see an exit strategy to get out of this army at this time, look, make all the noise you want, but take the opportunity and get out. In fact, I'd advise half the enlisted men to start wearing dresses and claim transgender. Do the clinger thing and get out. Play clinger and get out of the military. I know that sounds like I'm making light of it, but I'm not. I've raised the question before. Because Native people enlist at a higher rate, and we hear this all the time, and I believe the statistic is true, that Native people enlist at a higher rate per capita than any other people. I question why. I mean, knowing what we know, I did the whole show on cognitive dissonance. How do we embrace this notion, knowing what the United States really represents, not what they claim to represent, what they represent in terms of manifest destiny, what they represent in terms of white man's burden, what they represent in terms of the American Holocaust, slavery, all of that stuff. Knowing all of that stuff, how do you look the other way and say, yeah, but I'm going to put that uniform on? And then here's the other thing. When and where is the United States defending U.S. soil? Really U.S. soil. And from a Native perspective, when can you honestly claim that you're defending your homeland by enlisting in the armed forces? Look, even in the case of Hawaii, and I've talked about this before, even in the bombing of Pearl Harbor, let's be clear about that, because the United States did not illegally occupy Hawaii to bring it under its protection. It didn't illegally occupy the Kingdom of Hawaii and turn it into a protectorate state. No, it occupied Hawaii for its own protection. And I would argue that any place that the United States goes, yeah, they can make the claim, oh, yeah, we're going to put a base here in Guam. We're going to put one here in Okinawa. We're going to put one here in Qatar. We're going to put one here in Japan. We're going to put the one here in the Ukraine. We're going to put, in Turkey. We're going to put bases everywhere. Do you think that they're there to protect the countries that they've imposed their military presence in? No, it's about self-preservation, and it's about global domination. So, I mean, I asked the question, to enlist in the U.S. Armed Forces and the Canadian Armed Forces, because Canada gets sucked right along with it, to remind you. But to enlist in the armed forces with some notion that you're protecting freedom, how do we not take a better look at this and make the case, no, you're not. You're not protecting freedom. That's not what the mission of the U.S. military is. I would argue it never was. But it certainly isn't now. And with this commander, with this moron in the White House, if there was ever a time for a mass exodus of boots to leave the military, it should be now. So look, I don't say this to give Trump a pass for banning transgender enlisted persons. No, not at all. I think any prejudice, any discrimination, any bigotry is wrong. But I got to ask the question, why enlist? I mean, I ask it of Native people, and I never get a straight answer. And in fact, look, every year the Seneca Nation is going to hold their powwow, and it's going to be a veterans powwow, honoring those Native people who enlist in the U.S. Armed Forces. Again, cognitive dissonance, fully understanding that the United States military has never been a friend of Native people. And in fact, they still get called in against Native people. National Guard in North Dakota. We've had the U.S. military and frankly the Canadian military. You go back to Oka, Canadian Armed Forces, and our guys in Gunasadage and Ganawage were appalled that the Canadian military would be called in on Ganawage and Gunasadage. Well, what did you think was going to happen? You think because you enlisted in their armed forces that they were going to grant you respect? You're going to respect your sovereignty? Hell, serving in their armed forces is not an extension and is in no way an assertion of sovereignty. It's more it's voluntary compliance. It's voluntary subjugation. But I asked the question. I got to ask the question. When do you look at the U.S. military and say, no more? I mean, I never understood why it would have been viewed as a viable choice. And I understand, look, there's GI Bill, there's poverty issues. There are reasons that people rationalize that, yes, the best opportunity for me as a 17, 18-year-old kid is to enlist in the armed forces because I'm not cut out for college. I can't afford college. I have no prospects for the future. But think about that. I mean, first off, entering the military it has one purpose, and that is to defend national interests, whatever that means. But in defending it, what it means is that you've got to identify an enemy, you got to dehumanize that enemy, and you have to be prepared to kill that enemy. So enlisting in any of the armed forces is about killing people. Military defense is about killing people. Now, I'm not saying everybody who enlists kills somebody, but you know what? Everybody enlists plays a role in the idea. Hey, Trump said it in his tweet about banning transgenders. It's about overwhelming an enemy. And they have to concentrate on that. I mean, knowing what this guy is, who this guy is, his propensity to being mentally unstable. Who? I mean, I question whether he's in his right mind, but who in their right mind would place their son and daughter in his custody, in his hands to exploit? I mean, I I can't wrap my head around that. Ed, go ahead, weigh in.
I think people have to understand. I'm referring to Native people. There has to be an understanding of what we should really be protecting, and our land, our culture, our people. We don't have millions of people, at least within the Haudenosaunee. We have a limited number, and therefore,
in the total, we don't. I mean,
yes.
there are not a million Native people living on Native territories.
Right, and in doing so, you got to understand what should we really be focused on protecting. Okay, and it is not the United States interest. That's not what our concern should be, and if it is, then we're not focused, and that's a reality.
Well, and if you believe it's national defense. As opposed to national interest, then how do you identify what that is? What is the United States national interest? Because clearly it isn't national defense. It's not security, really. I mean, the conflicts the United States is engaged in are not necessarily associated with protecting the United States. It has money involved in it, oil, business, trade routes, all kinds of stuff. I mean, the United States' overwhelming support for Israel has nothing to do with defending the United States. It has to do with defending Israel. Yeah, which, regardless, no matter how wrong they are, whether they, what was the name of the ship that the Israelis sunk during the 6-Day War or whatever? I'm drawing a blank right now, but I mean, they sunk a U.S. ship, claimed it was an accident, when everybody knows it wasn't an accident. I mean, but regardless, I mean, if you're going to try to understand what that national interest is, then you should be able to identify if you're going to enlist. And to your point, Ed, if you're going to enlist because you embrace the shared philosophy about defending the U.S. national interest, doesn't it seem like you should know what that national interest is?
And a lot of people don't pay attention. Take a look at Dakota Access Pipeline. It was being defended against because they did not want to pollute the water table underneath the river. They didn't want to pollute the river and the water table, the largest water table in North America. And it would be polluting that. They didn't want to do that. And yet the United States still went through with the pipeline that's going to pollute that if there's any oil leak. And what they found out is there's an oil leak. But people don't seem to realize that the United States, what their purpose is not the people. You can take a look at any people. They're not the purpose of the United States, okay? The United States' purpose is the wealth of the top 1%. The corporate leaders and the politicians, they are the ones who are out to get what they can. And if you don't have that money, you're just a tool for them to use.
Well, and I think even to break that down, maybe it sounds, too conspiratorial to suggest that, that the whole use of the military is to protect rich people. And if you don't buy into that, then at least consider that the national interest does have to do with the national economy. It does have to do with the GNP. It does have to do with trade and commerce. And if you properly draw that conclusion, then you have to draw the next conclusion that the people who benefit from all of that the most are the top 1/10 of 1%. So if you don't want to make the direct association that you just made, Ed, you've at least got to acknowledge that the national interest serves the wealthiest and the most elite part of the population more than anybody else. And of course, I got to get back to this. Who are the people who are the expendable soldiers in this thing? It's sons and daughters. It's our youth. It's young people. I listened to an interview, and again, playing Buffy St. Marie's song, and maybe I should play it again. Maybe we'll go out with that song as well. I'll try to for a change, actually stop talking before we run out of the hour and go out with that song so people can be reminded what her message is. But I listened to an interview. In fact, you can find it on YouTube if you search Universal Soldier Buffy St. Marie. One of the videos starts with an interview from her, and I probably should have captured the audio for it. But she talked about flying to Toronto to go perform someplace, and she had changed flights on the U.S. side. She was coming from like California or something like that, and it was still at the period of time when the United States, in a way, was denying. Well, they were trying to deny how much military action and what kind of aggression was actually happening in Vietnam. They were denying their role in Vietnam, and what she came across were soldiers that were wounded soldiers that were returning. She might have switched over in Chicago or something, and so she spoke with some of these soldiers, and some of these guys had limbs lost, and they were bandaged up, and having the conversation with those soldiers, and then having the subsequent conversations, she asked herself, and she asked others, and the conversation started out like, who's to blame for this? Who's responsible? Is it these guys? Is it the soldiers? They, and of course, you're talking about, draft and people who are not necessarily volunteering. I don't know if at this time they were or not, but still, these people are giving their bodies to this service, however it is. I mean, so are they to blame? And then she says, well, but there are people that send them there. There's officers, there's generals, there are military strategists that send these guys into harm's way. Are they responsible? But then she goes, no, but it's politicians who make that decision. It's the president of the United States. It's the commander in chief. It's his secretary of defense. It's his cabinet. It's all of these people who play a role in dictating to what the national interest is that they're expecting these generals to fulfill with these soldiers. And then she makes the final leap that it's the same people who send their sons and daughters into these armed forces that vote those politicians in. So as for the song, and that's why she comes back to this, her quote from the song is, it's on you and me. That it comes back to every one of us, and of course she's talking about Americans, but even as a Native person who I feel detached from that whole American system, and I don't consider myself subjugated to it, but I had to advise my son when he turned 18, do not register for the draft. So I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, because beyond not enlisting. And I know there's still Native people. There's Native people here on this territory. And some of them may have their feathers rattled. And I know I'm not condemning people who have served. First off, let me say that. I mean, because whatever decision you made at that time was based on the information that you had at the time. What I'm saying is understand the information today. So going forward, not just going backwards, but going forward, you better make some really, really conscious decisions on what you're doing with your life and whose service you're placing your life into. So beyond enlisting, which I think Native people should certainly not do, and frankly, people of color who are so subjugated in this racist society that is still the United States, that is still racist. Why do people of color, people who are most marginalized by the dominant culture of American society, place themselves in harm's way? And again, I know some of it's poverty, the lack of opportunities, but we have to rethink that, and we have to own better choices. But again, beyond enlisting, I think it's time. I mean, I know what I told my son when he turned 18, and I know what other fathers who had sons that same age told their sons. But you only got to go back a few years back farther than that to realize that perhaps not everybody was advised. Maybe people didn't say, look, what are the, if you don't enlist, if you don't put your name, register for the draft, what's the downside? Jake, we talked a little bit before, I know you're off mic, but we talked before the show, and the question ends up being, well, are you not going to be able to get money for school? Well, you know what, Seneca Nation, you step up. If you're not providing the educational opportunities for your people, and you're essentially letting your young men make a decision to register for the draft because they're concerned about their own limitations, not GI Bill, but just being denied grants and scholarships, we need to explore the alternatives. And even if there is some repercussions from not registering, we should understand what those are. But you know what? If there becomes this really measurable movement where 18-year-olds stop registering for the draft, that sends a signal. And that's going to send a signal to the warmongers. And look, if 11,000 people are eliminated from the military because of this transgender ban, then maybe other people are going to say, look, they're being persecuted. Why? I'm gay, or I'm a woman, or I'm a man who's indifferent, and I have gay friends, I have transgender friends, and if the if my friends aren't good enough for the military, then I'm not sure that the military is good enough for me. And again, I know I'm half joking when I say, let everybody, follow the Klinger model to try to get themselves thrown out. I don't know how they're going to handle this thing, or if they're even going to do it. I mean, this could be, just bluster from Trump. But my concern is that this is a guy who is not stable. And not only is he not stable, I'm not sure that the Republicans in charge of the House and the Senate are that stable. I mean, some of the things that they promote are really disturbing. And I think this is a debate that has to be had, because rather than letting somebody else decide the fate of your child's life or your own life, I'm saying we got to step up, and we better do a proper analysis of the threat of the use of our young men and women by a war machine being led by a moron.
There's something people should realize and understand. We're talking about like 15 years ago. Most people didn't think we'd ever get any worse than George Bush. Okay, some of the things that he did, and he did them under advice from some of the people who were just plain old war mongers.
And oil mongers, by chance.
Oil mongers that would go to war in order to get their oil. We didn't think you could get any worse. And now we've got this guy, Trump, and the people were literally advising that they have a psychologist there maintaining a oversight of Trump, a psychologist, to see if he was capable of the decisions that would have to be made. Okay, there was an introduction of a legislation which would not allow the president to use weapons of mass destruction without permission from Congress.
Yeah. Kind of altering the war power stuff. Huh?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we're looking at in terms of if people want to enter the military, who are they following? Because a lot of people think they're following the U.S. You're not following the U.S. You're following basically from Trump through the generals all to the Pentagon. You're following them.
Well, and here's the worst part of it, Ed, is weapons of mass destruction is one issue, but he certainly has the authorization, because the U.S. is currently in the middle of armed conflict, to send men anywhere. I mean, he doesn't need it. He doesn't need a War Powers Act. They're already engaged in these conflicts, and so he doesn't need permission to start sending. To send. Everybody's concerned about his finger on the button. I'm less concerned about the finger on the button. I'm less concerned about his control over nuclear codes. I'm more concerned about the fact that he can send 10,000 men into harm's way, 10,000 women into harm's way. I'm more concerned about about the choices he's going to make, not just in Syria or Afghanistan or Iraq, but anywhere. This is a guy, and again, as concerned I am about his stability, I'm not convinced that the right wing of American politics is demonstrating much more stability than he is. So I mean, these are the concerns that you have to have, and again, you got to ask the question: is this something we are willing to place our kids in jeopardy over? And I know that I would oppose strongly. Not just my kids, but my grandkids or any young people that I know. I would say, no, look, if you want to build something, if you want to be a part of something, I mean, look, I got the Warrior logo here. Look, you want to read Louis Hall's Warrior Handbook? You want to know how to fight for something? then do it as somebody who has a responsibility with their decisions, not somebody who's going to be just directed to take orders from somebody who's of higher rank than they. I mean, understand what the military does. It breaks you down. Boot camp isn't just about physical training. Boot camp is about mental conditioning. It's about mind control. It is about breaking somebody down. It's about totally indoctrinating them to this idea that you are a part of something that is better than anything else, and that everything that you are going to be called to oppose is less than you, is inferior to you, or dehumanized before you. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's some powerful stuff. And and then of course you only have to look at how terribly veterans are treated after they've if they have the luxury of surviving physical damage from enlisting, they're racked with psychological damage. And and they first off, there's no decompression. There's no way to that they don't go through this whole idea of let's undo the indoctrination that we put you through boot camp. Let's do this whole this period of conditioning and get you back ready for society. No, they just take your uniform away and and hopefully your hair is going to grow out quickly enough so you don't look like a jarhead anymore. And there you are. I mean, look, I'm not saying every homeless person I see on the streets of New York who says they're a vet is really a vet. But I know the homelessness rates, I've seen them for veterans. The suicide rates, the depression rates, the substance abuse issues, the domestic violence issues. These are people that are damaged by military and then not taken care of by the very country that damaged them.
There's something really people have to understand. As people go through boot camp who entered the military, they are being trained physically, but like John said, they are basically being trained to dehumanize. And the reason that's done is that their weapon will be used without hesitation. There's no hesitation to shoot or to destroy whomever they identify as the enemy.
And it's not just a weapon in their hands.
No.
It's the fact that they are a weapon.
They themselves. It's the first and foremost is to take care of the mission. The second is to save yourself from getting hurt or killed, and then save your partners in the raid or whatever you're doing. But the first and foremost is to take care of the mission, whatever it was that you were ordered to do. And when you come back, basically what's happened is you've been dehumanized also. And it's hard for the veterans to see themselves as humans, part of the community, part of the society again. I remember I was in South Dakota and there were ceremonies being done for men coming back from Vietnam. And the whole aspect was to help them leave behind what it was that they had gone through, leave it be, let it go, and to regain their understanding that they are welcome and they are expected to participate in the community. That's not being done today.
No, it isn't being done today. Hey, we're going to take a break. We're at the bottom of the hour. We'll take a break. We'll go out with, I think, an appropriate song. It's about Little White Lies from Prairie Quarter.
Keep on Show children in the classroom English history. What do they teach about the Indians? Took us prisoner in your fight to be free. Little white lies, little white lies, little white lies, little white lies. Keep on telling me your little white lies. Keep on telling me your little white lies. Say your lies don't hurt nobody. Only meant to know yourself. All the white lies only get bigger. Start to lie to yourself.
All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane, and I've got Ed Schindler here with me in studio. And look, we're talking about a tough and weighty subject, and I know there are some people that are probably not thrilled about the position that I take on this. And of course, I don't beat around the bushes on this thing. Even when I've done things like, had guests on to promote the Veterans Powwow. I still, I didn't, I'm not going to call anybody down for that service, but I still got to ask. How do you, I don't know how people I don't know how Native people justified it coming out of the massacres and the aggression that were used against our people, even coming at the turn of the century, the closing of the 19th century. I mean, there were still very violent things that were happening to our people in the 20th century. I mean, the Osage murders are examples of that, but certainly there was more than that. And of course, the militarized police presence, that we've seen not just through the civil rights era and the AIM period, and our battles over things like Ganyangé and in 1990 and 1992 and 1997. I mean, the Standing Rock. I mean, we see this thing, and at some point, even in Standing Rock, when you looked at, I saw so many people that stood there and said, you know what? I served this country. Native people standing there, on Facebook streaming and almost, again, just like with the whole thing in the Oka crisis, to watch these young men who don't look like they're living very affluent lives, having served in the U.S. military, feeling betrayed because their lands are being desecrated today. Well, did you think your service was going to change that? The whole idea of enlisting in the armed forces to advance the national interest, what do you think that pipeline was or is? It's part of the national interest. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama referred to that pipeline as a federal infrastructure project. When Donald Trump talks about spending $3 trillion on infrastructure, you think it's paving your driveway or paving the road up to your driveway? No. You're talking about probably $1 trillion that he's, that would cost for him to build the wall he claims to want to build. But some of this is pipelines. Much of the infrastructure that they're talking about isn't just highways and bridges, and not highways and bridges for you, the taxpayer. You know what their biggest concern about highways and bridges is for? Commerce. So the infrastructure they're talking about isn't just highways and bridges. It's pipelines. It's power lines. It's high-speed internet, not just for you and me. It's the electric grid. It's all of that stuff. gas lines, pipelines, rail lines. It's all part of this infrastructure build. And I'm not saying it's not necessary, but let's be clear who it's, just like when you're talking about national interest when it comes to what that means. The main beneficiaries of all of that national interest are the wealthy elite. And there's no denying that. Hey, look, I know I jumped right back into things, but I had to, coming off of Little White Lies by Murray Porter. I want to take just a moment. I want to thank my sponsors, Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, my good friends like Ed Schindler and Tracy Brown and Cynthia Trice, Scott Snyder, Neville Springs, Sugar Montour, and many others who have helped and do help. We have a history. We've been at this. This is in our 8th year now, so we have been doing this for a good long time. And we've been on a couple of radio stations, commercial radio stations, and we finally built our own facilities here. But during those early years, I looked to a lot of people to help us, foot the bill, pay for our airtime. And I appreciate what those people did, even if they no longer, pitch in the way I wish they would. I can't begrudge that because they got us to where we're at now, and I appreciate that. Look, I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming, via LTNRadioNet.com. I want to thank stations like CKWE, the Gway in Tyndonega for carrying the program. I want to thank Real People's Media, Netroots Radio, Indigenous Resistance Radio, and I also want to thank everybody who shares the videos, whether it's the YouTube videos, and again, this show does get produced in a video that will be featured on our YouTube channel, Let's Talk Native TV. So any of you who share the videos, whether it's the YouTube videos, whether it's the Facebook videos, whether it's the audio from that we post on SoundCloud, whatever you do to continue the conversation, and you know what, and whatever you do to engage us in the conversations on my group pages, on Let's Talk Native with John Kane, and on Let's Talk with John Kane on WBAI in New York, those group pages are the place that I get a chance to engage in. And of course, we do some things with phone calls and that kind of stuff. But this subject today. Look, I know some people are going to think this is outrageous. It seems like an extreme measure to take. I don't think so. And again, consider Buffy St. Marie's song and in the era that it was written in. And what she says is, without the soldiers, Hitler wouldn't have been able to do what he's done. Without the soldiers, you would not have the death and destruction that war has brought the world over and over and over again. And again, during the break, we talked about the fact that the aggression from the United States, provoked or otherwise, the idea that the United States thinks that they're going to fight terrorism, they're going to put a war on terrorism. So you're going to end hostilities with hostility. Again, if there's ever a message from the Gonawida and Hayawenta, it's about developing a process for returning to peace, for regaining harmony. And part of that has to do with understanding. You cannot kill your way out of conflict. You can't fight conflict and hate with violence. The way that you end violence and hate is with understanding. Look, I know that sounds wimpy and everything else. I'm not saying that we all can just hug each other and get over it. No, I understand that even as a warrior, that you really can't be a pacifist if you have no ability to fight. I get that. Being a pacifist means that you chose the way of peace, not that you defaulted to it. So I don't want to sound like I'm a pacifist. I'm not as young as I used to be. I joke around saying that I only have about a half a can of whoop ass left in me at my age, and Ed, you might have a little bit less. I think you still do some damage with your cane, but I hope nobody's relying on us to defend the nation. But you know what? I still will, and I will put up a fight. But that is the last resort. That is the strategy of last resort. Mm-hmm. What I'm going to do first is talk to people and try to understand, because The aggression of the United States breeds aggression. Anybody, I mean, we talked, during the break. I mean, honestly, there at some point, you're going to be able to measure how many people became radicalized in what people are calling, radicalized Islamic terrorists, or whatever their catchphrases they want to use next. But any of this fundamentalist thinking, you could, at some point, you're going to be able to measure per drone strike how many people go to the other side as a result of it, and how many people are radicalized simply because of the aggression of the United States. That's got to be something that there's probably a computer model out there right now calculating it. So you have to understand that if you don't come up with a different way to resolve conflicts than just trying to be, might makes right, because it doesn't. Might does not make right. It doesn't matter if you've got the biggest gun or the biggest bomb. That doesn't make you right. It may scare people. It may make people fearful. But there's a big difference between fear and respect. And I've heard people say, well, if I can't get respect, I'll settle for fear. Look, that is not the path that we need to go down. So when I say stop enlisting, I'm not saying don't be a part of the conversation. Again, stirring the ashes. Look, enlisting in the armed forces is not participating in world peace. Now, I know it may not sound right, but let me explain. And we had this conversation. If you enlist, you no longer are making decisions. So to participate means that you engage in the conversation, that you help create the solution. Becoming another set of boots, another finger on a trigger, that doesn't make you a part of the peace process. That makes you a tool of the war machine. You want to become a part of the peace process? Don't enlist. I mean, you're going to have. We have more say than people know. Look, I participate in a lot of conversations. I participate in a roundtable discussion. That involves mostly it's called the group is called Melonics. It's basically people of color, and I heard one of these very articulate, well-educated black scholars say white people have all the power, and I said no, they don't, because if you believe they do, then you're the one giving it up. If you believe you don't have power, that means you're giving it up. So again, let me explain it some more. If you're unwilling to assert your power because you believe you're powerless, the most powerless people are the people who believe they're powerless, not because they're really powerless. There's a lot of things we can do. People talk about voting with our dollars, where we shop, how we, what we engage in terms of our commerce, and what we engage in terms of our social interaction. Again, that not only do I call on people not to enlist, and I'm officially calling on people, like I haven't already, not to register for the draft. But I'm not a big fan of voting. Especially if you're Native, I don't think we should vote in the non-Native elections. And in general, here's the problem that I have even with Americans voting, because if you simply check that box every 4 years, and you think that you have contributed to the civic responsibility of naming the next leader, who you really know nothing about, what you're really doing is you're continuing to strip yourself away of authority, because now you're saying, I've empowered somebody else to make decisions for me. That's what enlisting in the armed forces is. You just took your authority away. You're taking away a lot of your judgments, a lot of your decisions away, and you've placed yourself in the absolute, service of somebody else, and not in the service that you necessarily think you place it in. But it's the same thing about voting, because if you think that you cast your ballot, every 4 years to elect a new president, and that your work is done, I think that it ends up being a bit of a cop-out. I think that people have to do more. I'm not saying don't do it if you're an American. If you're Native people, don't do it. But if you're an American, by all means vote. But don't stop there. you should be involved in your school board, in your town council, in any community organizations. Look, even if it's your church, I don't care. I'm not a big fan of religion either. But whatever group that you can become a part of, I mean, pick up a cause and fight for it. And I don't mean fight against, necessarily, some institution. It may be that. But you know what? Pick up a cause. Be engaged. Be an activist. Because being complacent and being passive and being non-involved is increasingly going to diminish being an option.
And there's something that people should understand, and that is that communication is essential if you're going to be able to resolve an issue. There has to be an understanding of what is the concern and what is your belief in whatever or your understanding of what should be done toward that concern. And then you want to understand what other people, what they think, and come together in order to discuss any differences. All of that takes practice, and it takes, like we were talking about, takes power. You can't give up your power to be able to discuss concerns and issues that we face. Okay? And I always like to share with people this one quote, and it says, "We cannot solve our problems using the same thinking that created them." That's from Albert Einstein. And all he's talking about is, if you want to stop war, you can't stop war by becoming a soldier using the same thinking that created the problems. Okay? We have to start thinking for ourselves, not being given the thoughts and all the indoctrination,
assimilation, all of that. Yeah.
We have to be able to do that. That's where we're going to find that we have power, because we have to use our minds.
Well, and part of the whole thing ends up coming back to, again, that same conversation about what is the solution, and part of the analogy has to, you can look at it in medical terms. And Ed, you're the one always talking about. There's a difference between treating the symptoms and treating the disease. So yes. if you think you're going to attack terrorism, or wage a war on terrorism without addressing the underlying inequities that cause the tension. Look, I know Ward Churchill got into a lot of grief for suggesting that the toppling of the World Trade Center was somehow because of that it was the fault of the corporate elite, and I don't know what his actually words were, but when he said that it almost made it sound like it was justified. Look, I'm not saying it's justified, but if you climb inside the heads of people who are suffering and understand why and if they're suffering because of poverty, if they're suffering because their ways of lives are being eliminated because of corporatocracy, because of exploitation of oil. I mean, look at all of the tremendous amount of wealth that has come out of Africa, and yet the extreme poverty that exists there. Same with South America. Same with the Middle East. Look, I understand that some of the hierarchical structures of the Middle East, contribute to the haves and have-nots. But the idea that these places have become these breeding grounds for this conflict without anybody spending enough time to say, look, let's try to resolve the underlying problems. Let's treat the disease of poverty, not just. I mean, you've got to look at it at a higher level and get to it at a deeper level. I mean, I think this is part of the problem, is that we think that the violence is the problem when it's a symptom of an underlying problem. And I mean, I know this is I mean, you've had teachers and mentors in the past who have taught you this as it relates to everything from substance abuse to to behavioral issues and that kind of stuff. But I don't know, maybe you got some thoughts on that.
That's very important, because take a look at one of the things that I was taught was that, take for example drinking alcoholism. That's not a problem. That's just a symptom of a problem. The problem is the inability to resolve issues within yourself, to regain your balance, And that's what we refer to as finding peace.
Well, and this is that cognitive dissonance issue.
Yes. And those are the types of things that we have to understand are essential for the continuation of human existence in a positive sense, okay? Because we can't do it with the deprivation for most people, and then the gathering of wealth for a few minimum.
Yeah, I think the wealth disparity, frankly, that's really the underlying cause of all this stuff. And I know people say, oh, now you're going to start sounding communist and you're going to sound socialistic. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you have people suffering, especially people who are suffering and can view those who are not, you're going to create some resentment. Mm-hmm. And part of the whole issue, I mean, again, looking at just the native model of existence and the things that our people have gone through, the people of color have gone through, black people have gone through in the United States. I mean, of course, there's anger issues and there's prejudices that we have and, that Native people have, black people have. I don't really call it racism because we don't control the systemic processes that perpetuate it. But we can be angry. And we've had historical trauma. We've had these terrible things that have happened to our people. And again, I remember there was one Rivera from who's in the Doctrine of Discovery film. He talks about the extreme depression that Native people in South America went through when they considered that in a very short period of time, they went from living a life that had meaning and purpose and a rich culture to be convinced and told and it had extreme acts of violence perpetrated against them because they were told that their way of life was satanic and that it defied the white man's God. And they were told everything that you were ever taught for centuries, for millennia, was wrong. And we're going to tell you what's right. So they were not just dehumanized and humiliated, but they were so disregarded and they were so put down. And that has happened time and time again. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, you and I are not military guys, but can you imagine the indoctrination that a person goes through in boot camp and how people in Afghanistan or Iraq are being referred to, what they're being called? And then you're supposed to be discriminating enough to be able to see who is ISIS and who is not ISIS when you were just told that those people, are less than human in general. And then you tie it to the religion and their faiths and all of that other stuff. This idea that we can just be so condemning of another people and then exploit it. I've got friends who, who almost unreasonably will sing the praises of folks like Trump or the right-wing agenda, and they'll criticize everything from taxation and regulation and I guess I'm talking about my non-native associates, people that I know, and they're talking about all this stuff and the things that they're critical of, which they claim prevents from the expansion of business and hurts the economy and everything else, and yet their water's undrinkable. They've got family members who are dying of cancer because of the environment that they're living in. Well, how do you think Onondaga Lake became the most polluted lake in the country? It's because those regulations were not being enforced against crucible steel and allied chemical. There's 13 feet of mercury in the bottom of that lake. It didn't get there by accident. It got there intentionally. So everybody says, yeah, well, if you put regulations on a company like Allied Steel and Allied Chemical and Crucible Steel, then you're hurting the economy. Yep, you're right. It may make a higher cost associated with properly disposing of toxic waste, but the alternative is ruining the water supply. I mean, I just saw something on Facebook recently that talked about the unbelievable amount of water that is consumed by industry. And of course, it's not just, the water isn't just consumed, it's destroyed, it's contaminated. How many gallons goes into making a tire? How many gallons of water goes into making paper? All of this stuff. Look, I know that we kind of moved away from this whole thing, but I think this is the whole issue, is when you consider these things, when a country finally says, all right, we can't have our backyard being contaminated, so what does industry look for? They look for the military to expand the national interest so they can go about exploiting the resources of someplace else. Cheap resources, cheap labor, child labor, exploitive labor practices, and of course dumping, strip mining. And yes, it causes resentment. It's not that they resent American affluence. What they resent is American exploitation. And the problem is, most of us aren't the exploiters. We're the ones who they expect our sons and daughters to go serve in the military. Look, I do want to get a chance to close out with Buffy St. Marie's Universal Soldier. So I'll close it up here. Ed, I want to thank you for participating in the conversation. Look, I am not in New York this coming week or next week. I'll be home all week, so we'll be back here on Monday, obviously, and then back again here on Friday. But maybe we'll get a chance to shoot some videos. I know Jake and I have talked about that, so maybe this week, since I'm home for the week, we'll do that, and we'll promote that on the show on Monday and on Friday as well. Look, think about it. Don't enlist. Don't register for the draft. That's my message. So let me go ahead and we'll go out with. Let me see. I'm running the board here today, so you got to forgive me if I fumble a little bit. Buffy St. Marie, Universal Soldier.
He's 5'2" and he's 6'4". He fights with missiles and with spears. He's all 31 and he's only 17. He's been a soldier for 1,000 years. He's a Catholic, a Hindu, an atheist, a Jain.